Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the program. This is Daniel Weinberg from the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago, Illinois. And so let's jump right into it. Daniel, tell me a little bit about yourself, about the shop, and when and why you got involved.
Well, the shop, of course, was iconic here in Chicago. Thank you so much, first of all, Karen, for having me on your show. I'm happy to be here, and it's going to be a fun 45 minutes, an hour, wherever it happens to be. Um, and it started in 1933 as Home of Books from Ralph Newman. And he was very close to and it was just a general bookshop, but a guy named Carl Sandburg kept coming in, and he was writing his war years at the time and got Ralph interested in that and suggested maybe he'd like to specialize in Lincoln. And as Ralph said, no one ever told him it wouldn't work, so he went ahead and did it. In 1938, he began to specialize. In fact, when he started to specialize, this was actually his first logo. Kids, you want to cover your kids' eyes, but that was his first logo for Lincoln. It was Lincoln in the Civil War. And he jettisoned that pretty quickly because, well, as you can see, it's not the nicest one. He used this logo for a little while as well, but then took away the shawl. And then our logo is today from like this. That's the hat and umbrella, but that came from Carl Sandburg himself. And so 38, he began specializing. In 41, in 1942, he turned it to Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. But I just found out just a few months ago that for a short time in 1941, he called it A. Lincoln Bookshop because A. Lincoln is used so much by Mr. Lincoln. In fact, that's my license plate as well. And so the Civil War Roundtable began right around that time as well. The whole movement began in our shop. And then he kept going with that. And then in 1971, I was looking for something to do. And I was working at a bookshop part-time in New York City where I was going to school. And a mutual friend got me to see Ralph just to talk about the book biz. And he said, well, why don't you join me as a partner? And that's what I did. So in 1971, I came in there and bought every other book, as I want to say. And we went on there for about 13 and a half years. And at that point, it was time for us to go our separate ways. And I bought the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. He was still under Ralph Jeffrey Newman and was that way. And we were colleagues at that time, sometimes butted heads, as colleagues seem to do sometimes, but we were in the same area and we still did Abraham Lincoln together. And since then, now, gosh, it's been 49 years that I've been here. Hard to believe. September will be the 50th. And so that's kind of the bookshop. Not only the Civil War Roundtable, but the Civil War Book Club started here, and that's came and went during the centennial and after. And I started something called virtual book signing back in 2005. And now it's called A House Divided. In between, it was Author's Voice, so we changed it around a little bit, but interviewing authors, just like you do, except we did it in our studio, that's in our shop. But now, of course, the pandemic cut that off for a while. And so we're doing Zoom like everybody else, or everybody else is doing Zoom like us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you and I have talked a little bit about the humanities. There's quite a conversation now about the importance of history and the importance of government. And so we've seen all the way from the local level to the federal level, the drastic reduction in funding these facilities. The National Archives has lost budgeting over the last 20 years. They have 47 facilities and they can't do it with the budget that they've got. So, what needs to happen to convince people that history and government's important? And I don't know if you've heard anything about this latest San Francisco School District Board person. So, talk a little bit about why the humanities are important.
It's not only from the government, but also the schools have cut off the humanities at the knees because they're trying to say, well, you have to have an education to get a job. And I understand that there are more humanities majors than there are jobs, and the humanities has not paid a lot, but it's just extremely important for numbers of reasons, really. First of all, it creates a more rounded person. And especially now that we're living longer and people will be living longer, the students today need to have more than just their job to have a full, rounded life and maybe something to go to when they retire eventually. So they have to have those inner resources that are only come from the education of humanities. And you never know how the humanities education is going to help you in future jobs. In fact, Walter Isaacson, when he came out with his Innovators book, we had him in the shop for an interview, and he was saying in his book very forcefully that innovation requires the humanities. Mm-hmm. If you go into that book, you'll see some examples of how people have innovated because they had a great deal more in their mind than just mathematics or computer or whatever that is. And history in particular is so important. I tell younger people especially that they, we as youngsters, we always learn numbers of things. Don't put your finger in a light socket, or a smile will get you further than a frown. But I explain to them, remind them that someday they're going to be the ones running this country. And how will they know what to do, what policies to think about and enact if they haven't studied what humans have done in the past? So I think that's extremely important to be able to do that. Another part to me is that studying history, especially, that's because that's what we're in here, lengthens one's life. You inculcate a person's life or an era, and they become years that are not your own, inculcated into your own, so that you have added years. So today, for instance, yesterday, a couple of days ago, I felt 212 years old, just like Mr. Lincoln, because I know so much of him, and he's part of me. So that's, I think, lengthens your life. I'm telling you that's going to happen. I learned that really from my father, who went to Egypt years ago, and he came back and he said he felt when he landed there like he was 3,000 years old. So I'm going to study Moses eventually and become 3,000 years. And of course, the humanities give you a civic education. And Lord knows this country needs civic education. Mm-hmm. So people know what the government is, how it works, how one is to be an educated citizen to vote. So be responsible citizens and responsible electorate. So I think that's all important on why the humanities especially have import.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a former history teacher, I've seen over the last 20 years that history's been removed from the classroom, that government is almost gone out of the classroom. And one of the things we found is that actually music helps in mathematics and other subject matters. So yeah, it's a challenge. We need to get back to doing what we've been doing in the past. It's very important. So let's talk about historical artifacts. So what are some of those artifacts that you've seen or you found during your lifetime?
Well, first of all, artifacts collectors are important with artifacts because they're embedded in their own communities. And they show things that have not been seen, that are not behind glass. They can go to their schools, their historical societies, exhibit in local historical societies and libraries. So they bring a curiosity. They offer curiosity. If someone sees something that they've never seen before or can touch it, all of a sudden, I used to bring a life mask or hands of Lincoln to my kids' school. And they all loved to put their little hands next to his big hands. And they got interested in that. And by the time they were about 8 or 9 years old, I found that they understood the signature and why autographs are important. So history becomes alive through artifacts, and they illuminate our times. So that's why I think that's are so important. And collecting really artifacts and books, etc., is an intellectual pursuit. And they're intended to arouse that curiosity by offering flashlight glimpses into the past and into the human condition, because every artifact was produced for some human need or desire. And that's what's sought after, the story behind it, because that's really what you're peddling with an artifact is story. And Lincolniana is such a wonderful area for artifacts. It's so rich in the collecting area because Lincoln's life intersects with so many different areas of human endeavors. When you think about politics and the law, mathematics and logic, war, cultural history, human interaction, history of photography, mourning culture, political memorabilia. And all of these things have their own artifacts attendant to it, which one can collect, whether they're books or photographs, as I said, medals and coins, prints, lithographs, busts, oil paintings. I mean, it goes on and on. And that enriches not only the collector's life, but allows others to see it as well. I've had so many different artifacts. If you want me to go on and talk about that, you had asked me, and from my memory, I made a few that had made impressions, and then I went into the computer because I once made a list of some of these things, and oh my God, I've forgotten some of the things that I'd had. One of the things that I came up with, I made a print of this morning, was this wonderful life mask. There's been nothing like this one. This is from St. Gaudens. He produced this off the original. And this was, and for the 33 that were going to give monies to buy the original from Volk's son's friend, whom he had given it to. This Volk had given the original mask to a friend. And every subscriber got a mask. And this one was the mask that cleaned the mold from what St. Gaudens had made. And so that one he gave to Richard Gilder, who also helped make that happen. Here's one that I had years ago, and just for money, the dealer's problem, just for money, I sold this. And here's the only known instance of Lincoln misspelling his name. Lincoln, crossed it out and did it again until he got it right. And it was wonderful because I show kids that, especially, that, here is Abraham Lincoln, author of the second inaugural and the Gettysburg Address. He can misspell his name. You do that, I do that, but you still can come up and be someone important in life. Here, I just Xeroxed this off this morning. I got this and sold it to my brother-in-law a couple of decades ago or more, and he had me sell it for him recently. And really, it's the only known full, it's hard to see here, but it's actually a full fingerprint of Lincoln. He had large hands, and he was, signing so much, and he got ink on them, and he probably took this and put it to the side, and the whorls of his fingertips got into that. One of the letters that came up, things come up sometimes that you don't know will come. And here's one that I got. Harold Holzer was unhappy because I got it just after his secession book, and he really wanted, he could have used it for that. And this is a Lincoln letter to Thomas Corwin. who had been the senator from, let's see, am I doing this right? Is it upside down?
Yeah, it's upside down.
And here is Lincoln. And in 59, Corwin had asked him about something he had said in a speech. And so he's saying in here, this is just an important letter, that we were organized to prevent the spread and nationalization of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on, the more Democrats have gone with us than Whigs have gone against us. What brought these Democrats with us? The slavery issue. Drop that issue, and they have no motive to remain and will not remain with us. It
Mm-hmm.
is idiotic to think otherwise. The only time he ever used that word here, idiotic. And he goes on to say, do you understand me as saying Illinois must have an extreme anti-slavery candidate? I do not so mean. We must have, though, a man who recognizes that slavery issue as being the living issue of the day. So that is a letter that just came out of the Corwin family, had been sitting there and unknown, not in the Lincoln archives at all. Other things that I've had, his first elective signature from the Black Hawk War. He wrote out A. Lincoln, Captain. He had just been elected captain. And when people make a list of all the elected offices, they forget he was a captain in the Black Hawk War. I had William Bascom's copy of the Lincoln-Douglas debates inscribed to him. Bascom is the one who really made the Lincoln-Douglas debates printed and happen. He's the one who brought it to Follett, an old line Whig, to produce. And of course, Lincoln said not only the Cooper Union photograph, but those debates helped make him president. A table from Mathematics Courthouse. One of the three that was unknown, and went to Gideon Wells because his son was there, Thomas Wells, and brought it to his dad, and it went down through the family. They finally sold it at auction, and I was able to buy that for a client of mine. And there's nothing like touching a table at Appomattox and sit there with it. And in the evening, after everyone is gone from the shop, I'd sit there with that table and let goats arise. Just fabulous. Another one that really got to me was the Holland biography of Lincoln that was Ward Lammon's own copy.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And Ward he was, of course, one of the Long Nine in Illinois, and had been his fellow lawyer, and became really, he was on the inaugural train and became a help to him, kind of a guard for him. After the assassination, when Holland wrote his book, Lamon read it, and in the margins, he wrote out little pieces. He said two things that came up. He underlined where Holland talked about the honesty of Lincoln. He said, Lincoln was honest, but could stretch the truth when necessary. And he also then, where Holland said that he loved everybody, Lamon said in the margin, he loved no one, but was kind to all. So there is insight into Lincoln from someone who knew him fairly well. So there are some of the things. Another one just came to mind. I had the carte de visite of John Wilkes Booth that was used to identify him at the Garrett farm. And to have that in my hand for a while, oh my gosh. Yeah. I would look down the ground. There's no Booth there, but I'd look with that, and then last 2 years ago, I got a letter from an adult, Richard Garrett, the 11-year-old son of the farmer Garrett, who said in this letter that he viewed an officer take out from his pocket a carte de visite photo and bend over Booth to identify him. I mean, that's what an artifact can do for you if you have one like that, and can approach history with it. It just comes alive. Yeah.
Well, it's the same way when I stepped into Grace Bedell's house in Delphos, Kansas. The ghost of Grace was there, and of course, she clung on to the letter that Lincoln replied to her until it became so fragile they had to put it away. Her husband George was the first. They had the first bank, in Delphos, and he actually created a $10 note of Grace Bedell for his bank, which associated with Lincoln. And so it was
Stuart, I hope you're going to send some, you're going to send some food to us. You know, here you are eating in front of us. Send me a pizza or something. All right, go on. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So let's go to relationships. To me, relationships are so important. At the National Archives, I absolutely love working with the archival staff. It's a partnership between researchers and archivists that make it exciting as you're doing research. And even they don't know the records. They're so busy with what they've got to do, they don't know the records as intensely as the researchers do. And so when you find something new and you share it with them, they get excited as well. So talk about your relationships with librarians, curators, dealers, collectors.
Well, I mean, it's really a symbiotic relationship. All of us, whether they're librarians, as you say, or curators, dealers like myself, and other dealers that I know, and collectors who become friends. It's a symbiotic relationship. We all need each other, and we're all in the same boat because it takes all of us in our different capacities to keep history alive. We help each other. And who is not indebted to someone else on that list for helping them understand an artifact or a letter or a book that you've gotten, or help with a question? So we're all on that same vessel, curating, being custodians, telling stories of historical artifacts. And each of us is necessary for research as well, to find out what we've got. Recently, and I forgot to take it out of my vault this morning, I have a little pamphlet that came up a couple of years ago, that I'd never seen before, and I found out nobody had ever seen before. And it was an abolitionist pamphlet where in Buffalo, the Friends of Kansas had come together. Really, it's the Friends of Freedom in Kansas, and they had a national committee they put together in that convention to help the settlers to go to Kansas to offset all the slavery people that were pouring in from Missouri and elsewhere. And they wanted to set up safe houses and places in various towns where they could be and help make Kansas a free state. And in this, they had a national committee they set up. And I read that committee, and I looked on the list, and it just came out at me. There's one Abraham Lincoln Springfield right in that list. Mm-hmm. What is he doing among abolitionists? Boy, I wanted to find him to be a closet abolitionist, but It turns out instead, he knew nothing about it. He was just put on there. It was too late for him to have it taken off, but that's what he was there. But I had to learn what that pamphlet was. And it took other librarians to help me learn what it was. I put a little list together. Librarians helped me find documents from that Buffalo Convention, how his name got on there, and led me to journals that I did not know about and everyone else had forgotten about, that talked about what was inside that pamphlet, verbatim, with Lincoln's name in it, from 1926. And then a curator, I found out that one of these pamphlets had been given to the Kansas Historical Society. So I spoke to a curator there. She knew nothing about it. And one of the librarians had also given me an idea of which collection of one of the abolitionists that was involved in that. And it happened to be at Kansas. So I looked online in the collection. And as I was going through page after page after page, I found a file that looked very suspicious to me. That could be it. So I called that curator, and she went into the stacks and pulled out probably the dust of ages coming off, and pulled out that file. And sure enough, there it was. Unused, mine was used. I call it a GoFundMe page, pamphlet, because they were they were trying to get monies in order to help one of the houses on Prospect Street, not saying where it was. I had to go to curators about this because I went down to Illinois State and they helped me in the museum, Lincoln Museum there, and I found out that this had happened once before where the abolitionists had put that in. So curators helped me. And then I went to collectors. I went to historians just to find out if they knew about the story. Not a one did. And I went to collectors to ask if anyone else had seen that. No. So I had to go to all of them to put together the story of this. Real quickly, I'll show you another one that I happen to have that, again, here is in a card in Lincoln's hand. And he says it's a pass for a Mrs. Tubman. Mrs. Tubman. Wow. Here is Lincoln on the other side. I'm upside down again, huh?
Nope. Turn it around. You're okay.
That was okay.
Yep.
Here we go. Let me get it here so you can see it. And it's a pass for Mrs. Tubman and Mrs. Thomas. Harriet Tubman? Wow. In front of Lincoln? Unknown. Well, when I went to historians, they put me off that real fast. Harriet wasn't there at this time. This was December of 64, October of 64. She wasn't there. She was ill and out of town. She came through Washington in December, but not in October. So who was it? So how do I find that out? Well, they helped me find a Mrs. Thomas, who the Thomas was this Emily Tubman. It was her maiden name, Emily Thomas Tubman. And I found that she was in Georgia and a very wealthy woman. And the librarians helped me determine who Emily Tubman was and whom she was. She was even in Lexington, may have been a friend of the Mary Todd family. But nonetheless, she came through as a Southerner, a wealthy Southern woman during the war. And so it was librarians and collectors and historians who helped me that were all in the same together in this research. In fact, collectors have to do that too, because I, as a dealer, can't do all of it. I do as much as I can so I can make a story enough to sell the thing.
Right.
That's how I keep my doors open. But so I have to do enough, but there are numbers of times where a collector has come back to me with a further story. One time I sold an Eisenhower letter to a guy. He came back to me a few years later. It was an early auto pen signature. So he and I then went out and I gave him his money back, took it back as an auto pen, and we made a story for the Manuscript Society. So that's happened as well. Collectors find out more and they discover their own artifacts, what's there.
Right. Well, I've heard from watching American Pickers that, they find something interesting, but they've got to have some paperwork, some provenance behind it to be able to justify saying that it's from here or here or here. And so, yeah, totally understandable.
Artifacts especially need provenance.
Yeah.
And, letters usually are, you know or not that it's the person's signature in handwriting. Sometimes you have to do some research on that, but it will tell you. You might have to look at others, but it will tell you. Photography, some will usually tell you as well, but there are some things that will not. A pair of eyeglasses came up once at auction even, and they had a Mary Harlan Lincoln note. That was Robert Todd Lincoln's wife, right. Mary Harlan. Her father was a U.S. Senator. And she had a note saying these were her father-in-law's glasses. Well, one of them, I think we could tell with not too much bother, but looking and researching, that was probably true. The other one, though, was a little unusual. I I was dubious about it, and I did some more research. I couldn't find anything. It looked much more like what Robert had. So
Uh,
even with great provenance,
right.
he was correct on one, but wrong on the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that leads us to fraud,
Oh,
to forgeries.
well, that's a dealer's nightmare, and they come up. They come up a lot. Just to tell you about autographs, I have a personal collection of 74 forged Lincoln signatures in books, on photographs, notes, letters, all sorts of manners and forms. I give people a little bit of money. I can't put a lot into that, but a little bit. And I have 74 of them to take them off the market. And so that eventually I'll give them to some library or institution so that they'll be off the market permanently and can be studied as well. But things happen. This now is about 23, 4 years ago. $1 million item walked into my shop. And I said, how can this be? It was a copy letter book from Benedict Arnold, all the letters going back to George Washington when Washington sent Arnold up with Aaron Burr, his aide de camp, to try to take Quebec City. And so he copied every single letter Benedict Arnold did and signed them. The guy who came in with them, if he had torn them out, he probably could have gotten away with it. But the first page of it was in another hand saying given to the Historical Society by Colonel Aaron Burr in 1832. Well, what historical society is going to give up that? Mm-hmm. So I knew immediately something was wrong. So I got it from him, gave him a receipt in order to research for him. I was going to take it on consignment to sell it for him, he thought. But I have to admit, I kept it for a couple of weeks. Whoa, having this in my hand. And I read it through and I said, oh, what a great piece that would be on the cover of a catalog. But I knew I couldn't do that. So I had to find out what was the Historical Society in 1832. Couldn't have been very many. So I went through Aaron Burr. He had been in two places that I would have thought I might find it. First was New York City, but he hated him. They hated him. He hated them. And he got out of New York and didn't, so I couldn't see it there. So I went into the Maine Historical Society. And sure enough, they didn't know it was missing. Well, I shouldn't say that. The director knew it was missing. It hadn't come out to us. How her colleagues in the dealer world.
Right.
Let us know this is out there. Be quiet about it, but look for it. Didn't tell us. So 6 months had gone by, and he walked into me. He was working here in Chicago in the judicial system as a helper. And so it's a longer story than this, but I called the FBI and brought him in. They were waiting and arrested him. And this went back to the Maine Historical Society. So it happens quite a bit. Either it's fraud like this, stolen, or it's a signature that's wrong, or the Kaplan dag of Lincoln, allegedly the earliest known image of Lincoln. And it just ain't Lincoln.
Yeah.
But Sotheby's actually took it and tried to sell it. But the New York Times even had an opinion piece, an editorial the day of the sale saying, is that Lincoln? People for eons have seen who people were, recognized them by how they look. Is that Lincoln? Look at him. No, didn't sell. But so you have to be careful about that because people are always coming in with photographs. They say, this is Lincoln.
Oh, yeah. Well, Discovery Channel just did that thing on the photograph taken after Lincoln's death. It wasn't Lincoln. It was just not Lincoln. You could tell it was not Lincoln. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit about items that have been handled that have just been that aha moment. And so, I'm going to talk, about my aha moment. What was when in 2007, I discovered a new Grace Bedell letter that she wrote in 1864 to Lincoln. She was applying for a job in the Treasury Department. And so the very first sentence says, I am that, remember the little girl who wrote you the letter suggesting you grow whiskers. And then the next sentence was, I am that little girl grown to a woman. And of course, Grace was only 14 at the time. But what was so awesome is her very next sentence was, and in your reply to me. So right there, you've got that connection you've got the provenance that says that, yes, Lincoln did write back to Grace Bedell. And so she talked a little bit about her history, so on and so forth. And so I did the same thing that you did. I decided to do the research, and I'm originally from Kansas. So I drove out to Kansas, to where she settled afterwards, and did that research. And so everybody knows that for 20 years I've been digitizing, the records at the archives for the Lincoln Project. And so I got up and I was just doing a little jig. I was right there at my table and I was doing this little jig, and everybody comes over. Karen, what did you find? What did you find? And I told them, and everybody got excited, So now tell me about your aha moments.
Well, I mean, many of the pieces that I listed earlier were aha moments, like the Holland book. When you open it up and say, oh my gosh. One that came in, I see it over there. I forgot to bring it over here. And the first real quasi-public printing of the Emancipation Proclamation. After we moved here to this shop, this is our 12th location since 1933. And after about a year in here, I started to get into some of the boxes. And I pulled out a box I'd forgotten about from some years past, and out popped this piece about this big from the State Department. And it turns out, when I started to look in the Eberstadt bibliography of the Emancipation Proclamations, turned out to be really the first one that was used by the State Department, because that's where they were printing these up, to let diplomats and the State Department people know about the Emancipation Proclamation. And foreign counsel that were in, they wanted to let them know what we were doing as well. Here it was. It was just sitting in my garage for God knows how long in a box, and I completely forgot about it. Now, another one that was kind of aha is this one, that I had this wonderful little sketch of Lincoln. And I didn't know, I said it was really very nice, but I didn't know what it was. And it was really, very good, but what was it? I didn't know. I put it away, and I must have had this for about 20 years. And all of a sudden, someone comes to me, a colleague, with this wonderful sketch of Lincoln. It's a cartoon. You see, I'm trying to look behind it. I said, wait a minute, I've seen that before. And I dug this out, and now I knew that that was a man, Port Crayon, as he was known, and Strother, who was a sketch artist of the day, cartoonist as well. He was in Leslie's Illustrated especially. And here he is, of course, here he's trying to get McClellan. Get going. It says to Richmond in front of him in the sign. And here's Lincoln laughing, which I like about this. Is that, let me see, I'll get on the other side, you can see. Strother saw Lincoln at Antietam and elsewhere and saw him laugh. And I think this is the first time someone contemporaneous to Lincoln actually saw his teeth and put it into a sketch. There are gaps there, and I'm not surprised if that's the case, because he had pretty poor dental work, I'm sure, in Kentucky and Indiana, if any. But this was aha. All of a sudden, I know that was a sketch from life on the field. Now, this is also a sketch from life, because you do that. Someone who's doing something from life will go to back to the studio and put together an oil from life or something because they've seen him in the flesh, and that's known as from life. And another one, I don't have an image for you, was a man named Wendroth, who was a photographer in Philadelphia. And he had gone to Washington to photograph Lincoln in early 65. And he went back and produced an oil no one had ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, someone says, I have this oil. Are you interested? Oh my gosh. The aha moment was that this was the rest of the photograph because the heart of his, he took a photograph of Lincoln entirely down to his waist, and you could see his hands in the oil.
Mm-hmm.
But in the CDV, he brought him forward so he can be seen in a small format,
right?
Cut off the rest. So here was the rest of an original photograph we never knew existed. And even especially, you could see his hands, the veins,
Mm-hmm.
the skin tone and color. There's an aha moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we got people chomping at the bit to ask you questions. So I am unmuting everybody now. And
hello, everyone.
Afternoon. Good evening.
Angela, where are you?
Ah, where I am in France.
He's in France.
Yes, I am in France, in central France.
Oh,
and I'm sorry for my English, who isn't the same as yours. It's not completely fluent, but I have a question about, I asked to Karen via the written message side of the Zoom. It was about the Grace Bedell letter. I have another question. Can we consider in modern terms that Grace Bedell was de facto one of the first recorded communication director for a politician?
That's true. Very true. Unfortunately, I don't think that Lincoln ever saw the second letter from Grace because the clerk that knew about the relationship, because actually the communication continued with Grace through Seward and sometimes Lincoln to keep in touch with her. And
where can you get? How do you got the documentation showing that the communication continued between Grace and Lincoln? Because I couldn't find anything about it. I researched the story because I think it's so cute, but I couldn't find. I only heard about the second letter when she wanted to get a job in the Treasury as a Treasury girl because, as I read, her father went through economical difficulties and she wanted to help and support her family. So she wrote to Lincoln, and there is speculation in this story that, in fact, Lincoln had to ask the permission of Grace's father, and he wanted to give her a position in the Treasury, and he wanted also for her to come to live in the White House with him and Mary and Tad, but unfortunately didn't happen. How do you know the relationship, continued through Seward? How did you get the documentation? How can I get it?
Well, I'm still looking for that documentation. You hear stories that pass down, through history. And so that's what Daniel and I were talking about, the intense research that you've got to do to make sure that you can have the documentation to prove that rumor that comes down. And so what was fascinating about the Grace Bedell letter is after Robert Todd Lincoln died, his widow found the letter that Grace had written to him in October of 1860, and she wanted to return it to Grace Bedell. There was a politician, and I cannot remember his name, but he, Robert Todd Lincoln's widow, gave him the letter because he said he was coming out to Kansas and he would deliver it to her. But when he came to the house, he harped and harped and harped on Grace to let him keep the letter so that he could go around the country and keep the story of Lincoln alive. And George Billings, Grace's husband, was known to have a very short temper. And he basically told the politician to take the letter, get out of the house, and not come back. Grace, by this time, was blind. And so when she was in the kitchen, when George blew up on this politician, and her great-grandsons, who I met there in Delphos, Kansas, said she just cried for days. She never forgot about that letter. And the politician never returned the letter to Grace.
So
it ended up being donated to the Detroit Public Library.
So it was really an enduring friendship between Grace and Lincoln and Lincoln's entourage. It was far more than because nowadays, today's historians, they say, oh, all this stuff about Grace, the Republican Party used Grace as a political liability. She was used, she was a little girl manipulated, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't manipulation, it was real.
No. It was real, yeah.
Thank you for the answering. Sorry for my accent and my poor English. I don't speak every day. I read every day, but I cannot practice every day.
Well, my French, oui a peu. So
it's okay. Thank you.
So anyway, Stuart, do you have a question for Daniel?
Do I have a question for Daniel?
No.
Okay. Do you, Emily, have a question for Daniel?
No, I don't have any question now. Thank you.
Okay.
I've covered everything.
No, you haven't just yet.
There we go, Angela.
You mentioned that you do guide collectors on limiting their activities to certain topics or times. Can you elaborate on why this is important?
Why it's important to stay within a certain time period?
Time period or topic, I think, is that you mentioned.
Well, when someone starts out, you kind of scatter shot. You have to learn all sorts of things and areas. You don't know where collecting, for instance, or your own research and curiosity is going to take you. So it's kind of scattershot always at the beginning. And I don't try to push anyone into something if they don't already come with the idea. Yes, a couple of days ago, you, Angela, and I were on our Take a Break with History show. And Robert Turner talked about how he was interested in Illinois, really exclusively, frankly. And he came to me with that. He had already decided that's what he was interested in. But otherwise, it really it's very organic. It's how it comes about and what takes you. It's always a good idea, just as he mentioned, to, when you're collecting, to narrow it to an area, because there's so much usually in any one area to collect. Stuart knows that, but because his book shows how much there is in every category, collecting Lincoln. But it's really something organic that happens. But, to me, I mean, I've even come to the point in my elder age that even, if you'll pardon the expression, a paperback collection is a collection. And you're a collector even if you have paperbacks. Not going to mean much when you're gone. Don't try to sell it at Christie's. But that's the other part of maybe narrowing down to an area. You have a story within that area, a depth of story within that area. And also it might mean more, if it's important, monetarily at the end as well. But certainly as a story and the breadth and width and depth of a certain area will come out if you collect within that area mostly, because no one stays just within that, because there's always something that you see. We've seen some like Frank Williams or Louise Taper, and I've known many others who can't get out of their way and see something, they love it, they've got to get it, and they do, even though it's not part of what they really have an interest in, but it's tangential enough. So that happens too. Hope that is what you were asking for.
Yes, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for the question.
Stuart, got a question?
Do I have a question?
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add to Daniel's thing that if you try to collect everything, you'd go broke.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just every field has so many subcategories. And Lincoln, I know people that are autograph collectors, or I'm a photograph collector, but I pick up some statues and I pick up other stuff every so often. But yeah, I can't really collect everything. Good God, you go nuts.
That's true. I mean, I've picked up on eBay, little glass things with Lincoln's signature, and I think I have an Avon. You remember the old Avon little bottle with Lincoln's head? And I've got a Stein for Lincoln. And then from Daniel's shop, I bought the Rail Splitter series.
The reprint.
Yeah, the reprint.
And you can't see it back here because it's just off. I actually have a bobblehead of John Wilkes Booth. But without John Wilkes Booth, this shop wouldn't exist.
Yes.
Took martyrdom.
I have a question for Daniel about his collection. All of the artifacts you have, is that originals, or is that some copies or facsimiles, or what? Most is it originals?
Yes, that's what we are. We're a shop, a 19th century shop that specializes in Lincoln, the Civil War, and presidential. And we have original material, authentic, because we have people come to us who want to hold original and collect and be a custodian of original material. So everything we have is original, exactly it.
I'm not the kind of collecting stuff, but I have many interests in history. And what you said earlier reminded me, yesterday on the French TV, there have been some documentation about the Titanic sinking in 1912. And, it's like the Civil War. There was many enthusiasts around the world on that stories. And many people, they do collect artifacts, and they say the same thing as you, that it's keeping his story alive, because any artifacts has a story to tell. And by seeing your Lincoln's artifacts, I especially love the carte de visite, the passes he wrote from the White House to the citizens who came to visit him to ask favors and requests. And it makes the things really real. It's not, you're not just looking at a guy confined in history books. He was a real person. That's very important, what you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you make some very good points about that. And that's why people are custodians of artifacts, but not only for themselves and people around them, but also for the next generation. And not everything should go into a museum, because where would collectors like us today be if everyone before us had given things to museums? We need to have museums. They're vitally important. That's where most people will see the past. But as I say, being embedded in the community is important. And that's one of the reasons that Malcolm Forbes of Forbes magazine, the founder, when he passed, he had such a huge collection, took 5, really 6 auctions to get rid of most of it. And he had told his sons, don't put these into museums, put them back into the marketplace where others can have the joy that I did throughout my life.
Do you have a concern, Daniel, that some collectors, they'll purchase things and then they go in a deep, dark vault and never see the light of day again. And so that item isn't shared with the public, and a lot of history is lost?
sometimes it happens. I don't see that all that often, but it does happen that, in fact, there's actually something right this second that I sold to someone locally here, and he unfortunately passed just a couple of months ago. And there's a document that he has that is the only time I've ever seen it, bearing the signature of the man who gave John Wilkes Booth his last drink in the saloon right next to Ford's Theater. And then he drank it and went out and did the deed next door. Now, I've not been able to have contact with his daughter. I've tried, but she's not coming to me. And she's going to take that document, I think, not know anything about it.
Right.
And she's going to take it away outside of Chicago. She doesn't live here. And it's just going to be a document sitting on her wall, and no one's going to know what that is until some future dealer or collector like myself recognizes the name, which, 99.9999% I'm not going to recognize that name.
Right.
So there's one I fear is going to go into a black hole.
Well, I've heard horror stories about families who come in after a grandparent or great grandparent, is deceased, and they go up into the attic and they find all these Civil War letters and just toss them.
Yeah.
I cringe when I hear that. And then, of course, we're still on the quest to find that trunk full of Gideon Wells papers.
You got it.
When John Sellers was alive, I worked at the Library of Congress for a few years, and we used to talk about that, about the story of these missing Gideon Wells letters that were in a trunk, and the families were feuding over
they still are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And even institutions like the Chicago Tribune newspaper, this is now a good 30 years ago, a fellow dealer of mine here in Chicago, a book dealer, was working also at the Tribune writing obits. And one day he found out that they were tossing their archives. They had no room for them anymore.
Oh.
And he went out into the alley and just pulled things out, fabulous little things from the Chicago Tribune archives. And he didn't get everything.
Yeah.
And stuff just went.
Yeah. No, when I was doing research on Westinghouse, I drove over to where his factories were in Ohio, and they told me stories about, when people went into one of the empty warehouses up on the 3rd or 4th floor, there was a whole floor of glass plate negatives.
Yeah.
Just piles of glass plate negatives. And what these people did is they just threw them out the window.
Well, of course, the other side of that is that it was still glass.
Right.
And, things had moved on in photography, but glass, and it's, saleable.
Yeah.
Okay. It had, it had all of history embedded in each glass. So they sold it to hot houses, and they put them up on top. And, it must have been something to go into a newly constructed hot house and look up, and you see, Seward and Lincoln and Chase and everyone from history who sat before Gardner or Brady. And of course, the sun took those out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I'm just going to butt in to end this on a fun note and not have Mr. Booth mentioned a sad third time concerning paperbacks that do not sell. Just recently, a Robert Gober photograph of donuts in a paperback sold at Christie's for $240,000. Thank you. That was it.
Wow. Well, yes, because paperbacks go away, and then the one that's left, but it has to be, in mass market, it's hard to have all of them go. So it has to be something a little bit earlier that people never saw or knew, and someone kept it. So that's
it wasn't cronuts, it was donuts. I checked.
Fascinating. Thank you for that.
Well, guys, guys, I mean, time has flown. Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I just wanted to tell you a story. I also collect fluorescent minerals, or I used to collect fluorescent minerals. And one mineral story in the making the rounds among mineral collectors was there was a guy that collected crystals. And when he died, all the other mineral collectors found out, went to his house and said to his wife, what happened to all his rocks and minerals? And his wife said, oh, that's crap. I just, I got a dumpster here and I threw it all in the dumpster and had them take it away because, he told me they were all like a few bucks each. And so it really, it was junk. They said he spent $60,000 to $80,000 on some of the incredible crystals. And he didn't tell you that because he didn't want you to know how much money he was spending. And so you threw out $500,000 worth of his collection. And wow. They all started figuring out where could they possibly have dumped this. But I always try to tell people, you really should document your collection in some way so that people, your relatives, everybody knows that this stuff is expensive and valuable.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, and they look at it, like you say, I remember seeing, I like watching murder mysteries, and there was one on TV, and the two cops come to this, it says antique shop. And so one of the guys says, well, what are we coming to this junk shop for? He says, well, because it's an antique shop, let's check it out and see. So the guys go in and he looks at it and he picks up a little thing and he says, what is all this junk? And the guy says, well, you see that license plate over there? That's the first license plate in America from Alaska. And he said, that's worth tens of thousands of dollars. And he says, this little minnow fishing lure, this is worth $24,000. And so the other cops,
Stuart, money or not, it's history, and that should be documented. If you don't want your family to know, put it in a safe deposit box so that when you go, then they'll find it and say, oh, he really was a genius.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll have to have you guys back for a Zoom and have a Zoom presentation on how to document your artifacts and your family history or whatever for future generations.
That sounds good.
Does that sound good, Stuart?
That sounds good.
Would you be interested?
Well, thank you, Karen. I enjoyed this immensely.
Oh,
Thank you for asking me.
You are so welcome. It was an enjoyable time. So, thanks a lot, Emily. Bonjour.
Thank you, Emily. And Stuart, we'll see you again.
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll talk to you later.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.